In a prestigious high school, where the walls were covered with framed diplomas and images of young graduates posing proudly with their certificates, the establishment cultivated the image of academic excellence. The atmosphere, subtly competitive, hung in the corridors like an invisible mist. Students were judged not only by their grades, but also by their ability to shine in an environment where the slightest misstep was amplified and scrutinized. It was not an ordinary high school. It was a sanctuary for future leaders, geniuses in the making, and every student knew they had to live up to that image to be recognized. Those who failed to distinguish themselves faded into anonymity. And among the most feared in this establishment was Mr. Lemoyne, the mathematics professor, an uncontested figure of power. Mr. Lemoyne was not only a teacher, it was an institution in itself. With his glasses on the edge of his nose, his stern face and his slightly disheveled hair, he inspired as much fear as respect. In his class, the students stood straight, their hands always ready to grab a pencil, but also to hide behind their notebooks. His reputation was well established. He had this ability to demystify complex mathematical concepts, while exerting constant pressure on those who seemed less capable. He made no effort to hide his disappointment with those he considered less promising. He had a very specific vision of what a good student was, and this definition often excluded students like Malik. The latter, although he was calm and discreet, did not correspond to Mr. Lemoyne's expectations. He had this distant look, this silence that many took for indifference or weakness. In Mr. Lemoyne's eyes, Malik was the type of student who, despite undeniable abilities, did not seem to want or know how to be fully involved in the race for excellence. In the teacher's mind, there was nothing more frustrating than seeing a student not exploit his potential, or worse yet, playing the role of the invisible good student. He had never bothered to dig deeper to understand Malik's reality. He didn't know that a genius was hidden beneath the young man's calm appearance. Malik, in fact, had a special relationship with mathematics. It was a language he had learned to speak almost naturally, but without pretension. He had never sought recognition from his teachers or his classmates. Unlike the other students who took part in group discussions and extracurricular activities, Malik preferred to escape into the quiet corners of the library, where equations became puzzles that he solved with disconcerting ease. At home he often worked late into the night, with his father working long hours at a construction company and his mother being a nurse. They were away at these times, giving him all the time he wanted to delve into his books. The difficulties that Malik encountered on a daily basis, the sideways glances, the persistent prejudices, and the minimal expectations of others, were part of his world. But he never talked about it. Silent suffering was the companion of his days, and mathematics was his refuge. He knew his abilities didn't match what many expected of a boy of his background and appearance. In an environment where he was often invisible, he had learned to blend into the shadows. That morning, Mr. Lemoyne entered the class with a very particular intention. He wanted to shake up the order of things. The bell had barely rung when the teacher, with a slightly too confident smile, announced that he was going to challenge his students with a particularly complex equation, a sort of silent test to separate the good ones from the less good ones. It was Mr. Lemoyne's habit to set difficult challenges, but this time, he had a very precise idea. He knew Malik would be an excellent candidate for the mockery he had in mind. After all, according to him, such a discreet and self-effacing student simply could not live up to the others. He thought that this challenge would be an opportunity to highlight the difference between those who shine and those who, like Malik, remained in the shadows, undeserving of real support. Mr. Lemoyne put the equation on the board, an advanced algebra problem, a second-order case that even some of his best students would find intimidating. He announced in a firm tone, but not devoid of this small dose of malice, that he expected a quick solution. He wanted to see who among his students could cope with such difficulty. "So, who among you feels ready to solve this equation?" he said, scanning the room, his eyes lingering on Malik with an air of confidence and defiance. He was waiting for a reaction. The silence in the room was heavy, oppressive, like a calm sea before the storm. None of the students dared to raise their hands. Everyone, immersed in their own thoughts, hesitated. Eyes turned furtively towards Mr. Lemoyne, looking for an indication, a gesture, a permission. But none felt bold enough to challenge the professor's authority, nor to speak up without being invited. He scanned the room with an almost palpable intensity, his eyes boring into the rows of students who all suddenly seemed to have lost their confidence. Then his eyes landed on Malik. This boy who always remained in the shadows, discreet and reserved, this young man whom he had always perceived as average. The type of student that Mr. Lemoyne automatically classified among those who, despite appearances of diligence, had never shown exceptional behavior. Not bright enough, not charismatic enough to shine in the spotlight. He was an ordinary student, in an establishment where extraordinary was the norm. The idea germinated in his mind, devious and calculated. Why not put him to the test, the student who never had the chance to attract attention? He was the perfect candidate to prove to the class that appearances could be deceiving, that success was not reserved for those who seemed the most promising. The challenge was not just mathematical. It was a subtle trap, a way of emphasizing the difference between those who had the stuff and those who didn't. And, for Mr. Lemoyne, Malik represented this category of young people whom he perceived as less capable. "Malik, come to the board and solve this equation," he said in an almost mocking tone, his crooked smile enough to betray the ulterior motive which motivated his proposition. The other students, silent, held their breath, already anticipating failure. It had become a setup, a spectacle where Malik was supposed to fail, and where Mr. Lemoyne would emerge victorious, thus proving, in his own way, that perceptions were often justified. Malik looked up slowly, surprised, a spark of uncertainty in his eyes. But he didn't hesitate. In this kind of situation, he knew that refusing or showing too much emotion would only make things more complicated. His eyes closed for a moment, refocusing on the task at hand. Then, without a word, he stood up. The whispers of the other students died away as he crossed the room. Malik could feel every eye on him, every whisper turning into silent judgment. The air seemed thicker with every step he took. The table, although a simple calculation tool, suddenly became a stage, a space where much more than a simple equation was at play. It was a question of demonstrating something much greater. His thoughts were racing, but he didn't let anything show. The moment he took the chalk in his hand, the silence in the room became almost palpable. He stood there, calm and focused, with his eyes fixed on the equation before him, defying ordinary logic, but not for him. No, for him it was just another puzzle to solve. He had never been impressed by numbers. Mathematics had always been his playground, his refuge. Where others saw a problem, Malik saw a puzzle, a series of steps to unravel. Undaunted by the palpable tension, he began to write on the board, his arm moving fluidly, tracing signs, symbols, numbers that lined up in an almost natural harmony. In a few seconds, he had grasped the method, the different variables at play, and his hand was tracing the steps with impressive precision. Mr. Lemoyne, for his part, observed the painting with a piercing gaze, his eyebrows furrowed. He was waiting for the error, the misstep, the moment when Malik would get lost in the calculations, when he would stumble and when he could exclaim, triumphantly, that he was right to have underestimated this student. But nothing of the sort happened. Malik continued to work, each step following logically the previous one, each number and each operation coming together with astonishing fluidity. Where Mr. Lemoyne thought he would find hesitation, a gross error, Malik offered him reasoning of astonishing clarity. It was as if the numbers themselves respected this young man, bending to his will. The entire class was frozen. Every student, even the most confident ones, seemed unable to understand what they were seeing. They exchanged worried glances, trying to understand what was happening. How could a student like Malik solve such a complex equation with such ease? Was it possible that Mr. Lemoyne made an error in his judgment? Was it really Malik who solved this equation, or was it just a fluke? Malik, without haste, finished his work. He looked at the solved equation, stepping back slightly to observe his work, and his eyes fixed on the final solution. A heavy silence fell over the room. It was not the answer to the equation that was most striking, but the way in which he had solved it, with calm, confidence and perfect mastery of every detail. It wasn't just a question of mathematics. It was a silent display of his intelligence. Murmurs began to spread throughout the class, but they were different from those that had come before. It was a murmur of astonishment, of disbelief. Some students leaned forward, observing Malik's calculations with a new curiosity, a kind of respect dawning in their eyes.
Nobody knew what to say.
The moment of mockery that Mr. Lemoyne had imagined had transformed into a demonstration of silent genius. Mr. Lemoyne, frozen in front of the painting, suddenly felt caught off guard. His smile had gradually faded, giving way to an expression of confusion mixed with frustration. He didn't see this coming. What he thought would be a moment of glory for his own worldview had turned into a silent defeat. He had believed, without knowing it, that Malik would be the pawn of a game that would bring him to light. But in reality, it was he who became the subject of humiliation. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. The math teacher, renowned for his ability to manipulate and control his environment, was now faced with a student who had challenged him, not through rebellion, but through pure intelligence. He slowly turned towards the class, trying to regain some of his presence. "Well, it seems Malik has found the solution," he said, his voice seeming to lose its confidence. "Maybe I underestimated his abilities." But the damage was done. The students, until then intimidated by Mr. Lemoyne's authority, began to murmur among themselves. Malik had not only solved the equation, he had reversed a power dynamic. It was not just a demonstration of his mathematical skills, but a silent act of resistance against the reductive expectations placed on him. He had proven that he was not the student he was believed to be. The one we had categorized as average, the one we sometimes looked at with a condescending air, was not only capable of solving a complex equation, but of challenging a biased vision of the world. The rest of the day passed in a strange hubbub. Malik, although discreet, felt the eyes of the other students falling on him. This look, although so banal, was charged with a new energy. He was no longer just another student. He was now a young man capable of surprising, of destabilizing the expectations that people had of him. Rumors began to spread through the corridors like wildfire. Malik, the black student, solved an equation that no one could have done. From those who until then believed him to be invisible, he had suddenly become a central figure, a talked-about example. This small victory, although internal, spread like a burst of light in the shadow of incomprehension. For Malik, this did not represent a need for validation. He never tried to prove anything to anyone. But this moment, this precise moment when the perception of others began to change, marked a turning point in his life. He felt a new form of legitimacy, not because he had been applauded, but because he had shown, without fanfare or exuberance, that he did not need the approval of others to exist fully in his truth. The next day, Mr. Lemoyne did not directly address the incident in class, but he could not escape the furtive glances of the other teachers. Malik knew that the shadow of this event would hang over the staff room for a long time. Lemoyne, despite his authority, was only a man, and this moment of vulnerability, where his judgments had been undermined, had marked him. He couldn't help but wonder if he had acted too quickly, if he had acted on deep-seated prejudices he hadn't even noticed. The principles to which he believed he was faithful had crumbled under the weight of a truth he did not want to see. Had he seen in Malik a simple reflection of his origin, of his appearance, or had he really sought to understand the richness of his spirit? However, Mr. Lemoyne, in his pride, tried to maintain a facade of indifference, refusing to admit that he had been destabilized by a student whom he had underestimated. He chose not to bring up the subject in class, hoping that the incident would dissipate with time. But he knew, deep down, that something inside him had changed. Malik, for his part, returned to his place without making a fuss, without trying to attract more attention. He had not sought recognition, he had simply acted. The moment had marked a turning point not only for him, but also for everyone who had seen him act. What began as a moment of mockery turned into an opportunity to demonstrate the depth of human capabilities, regardless of skin color, appearance, or first impression. In the classroom, Malik was no longer just the average student. He was the one who dared to challenge conventional wisdom. In the shadows, Malik knew that he had just sowed a seed of reflection in the minds of all those who had underestimated him. For him, it was just a small step towards recognition. But for Mr. Lemoyne, it meant much more. It was a moment when prejudices, although still present, were cracked. And every crack showed a glimmer of hope. Others' expectations of him had changed, but he knew there was still a long way to go before these changes would be visible and lasting. It was a moment of deconstruction, a moment when hasty judgments were laid bare. Malik was not just another black student. He was an individual capable of astounding, challenging and surprising. And that, more than anything else, would change his life forever. He would no longer be content to hide in the shadows of other people's expectations. Now Malik would be seen.